In 1978, director Richard Donner brought the original superhero to the big screen and asked audience to believe that a man could fly. On today's Moving Panels, we discuss Superman. Welcome to Moving Panels, the podcast where we discuss movies and TV shows based on, inspired by, and adapted from the world of comic books. I'm your host, Laramy Wells, and joining me on today's episode from Movie Views, News, and Reviews, he is the creator and host of the 80s Flick Flashback podcast, Mr. Tim Williams.
Hello, everybody. Thanks, man. I appreciate you having me on your episode. I'm excited to talk about Superman, the movie.
Oh, it was very fitting to get you as a host. For those of you who've never listened to the 80s Flick Flashback, Tim has had me on for a few episodes as a guest host. And it was actually a conversation we had about the fact that he couldn't do Superman because it came out in 1978. So when I decided to start up this podcast, I was like, well, I'm going to do Superman, and I'll have Tim as my guest.
Very cool. Yeah. 1978 does not fall in the 80s, unfortunately, but I did see it in the 80s because I was only 4 years old in 1978, so I wasn't old enough to really watch it back then, but I watched it several times on cable as a kid.
Yeah, I not to make you feel old or anything, but I wasn't even born when the movie came out. So I definitely didn't see it until later when it was on television. Probably didn't actually even see it without a television edit until much later in life. I
don't know if there's really that much they would have edited it. I mean, it's a pretty clean movie overall. I mean, I can't really think of anything that stood out as, besides just putting commercials for a TV version, I can't imagine anything really being cut as far as content.
Well, I would think it's one of those, you remember you would get the edited for time, because this is almost a 2.5 hour movie.
Yeah.
So clearly they did have to cut some stuff out in order to get it to fit in the typical 2 hour time limit plus commercials.
Right. Yeah. Because definitely back then you didn't get a whole block of 3 hours for a movie for at least for prime time. So AMC nowadays, an hour and a half movie runs for 4 hours on AMC because they run a commercial in minutes. But yeah. Very different back in the 80s, I'm sure.
So besides the movie, what is your connection with Superman growing up? Because every kid, has their Superman stories.
Well, like I said, I remember seeing the movie. I was pretty young seeing it, and we had HBO as a kid. So I remember seeing a lot, like that's how I saw Star Wars for the first time. And, Superman 2, I remember those pretty it was funny when the Superman started and you saw General Zod and the other two. I was thinking, I thought this was in the second one, not the first one. But of course, both were made at the same time. I was a little surprised when they didn't come back at the end. But I think I may have more memories of Superman 2 more than I have of Superman 1. But there's still a lot of iconic scenes there. But I mean, like any other kid, especially in the 80s when underoos was a big thing where the t-shirts and underwear. I definitely had some Superman underoos. I think I had like a Superman figure, like a toy figure as well. But I really didn't get into comics and didn't really know much about comics until I was much older. So I don't really have any kind of comic background on it. But definitely the movie. And then, of course, once again, as I got a little older, finding out about the old serials, the old black and white episodes of Superman. And so I saw a couple of those when I got older. The movies are pretty much pretty much my entire life, Christopher Reeve was Superman. That was the only Superman I really knew. And then, of course, we've had newer versions here in the last, 10, 15 years. I mean, Christopher Reeve has always been my Superman. That's the only Superman I really knew. So,
yeah, I mean, we'll talk about this probably again and again throughout, but I mean, he really was the standard for so long, and still is, in my opinion. I mean, this was 1978. He played Superman, in 4 different movies, ending right as the 90s began. And then we wouldn't get another Superman, at least in the movies, until Brandon Routh in the early 2000s. So, Reeves kind of held on to the mantle of the movie Superman for 20 years.
And I would even say Brandon Routh really was doing a version of Christopher Reeve doing Superman. Definitely. So that, I mean, I really picked up on that a lot watching it again for the podcast. So,
all right. So, of course, we're here to talk about the original, the OG Superman the movie that was released in. I didn't realize it was kind of a Christmas movie. It was released December 15th, 1978. So this was right as the summer blockbusters were becoming a thing. So it kind of makes sense that probably Christmas time, the holidays, was more of when you would release movies in theaters in order to get the big audiences. So it kind of makes sense. It was actually the most expensive film ever made at the time. It cost $55 million, which to me seems like a drop in the bucket compared to today's movies. And it really was the birth of the modern superhero movie. There weren't superhero movies before this. We had the television shows, like The Incredible Hulk, Batman back in the 60s. And even though they did a movie, it was really just a long episode. We hadn't really had a superhero movie until this.
True. I agree. Yeah. I don't have anything to add to that.
Well, and then this movie actually marked the 40th anniversary of Superman because he first appeared in Action Comics #1 in June of 1938. So, 40 years before. He, of course, was created by Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster. But Superman, not only is this the first superhero movie, as some people might debate, but Superman, a lot of people will debate it, but I believe that he was the first superhero in the comic books as well.
Right.
I mean, before Superman, comic books were more about detectives and cops and pirates, and you might have gotten someone who had magical abilities. I know that there's a magician, I can't think of his name, that some people argue he came out before Superman and he's the first superhero, but that's still in the realm of sci-fi, which is really what comic books were. Comic books were more in the realm of sci-fi. Superman was really the first costumed superhero. All right, so let's look into the characters from the comic that came to life in this movie and some that didn't come from the comic. And of course, we got to start with Superman, with Clark Kent himself. Even though this is the first time Superman has been in the movies, it is not the first time that someone has played Superman. He was previously played, you mentioned the movie serials, he was played by Kirk Alyn. Now, Kirk Alyn actually has a cameo in this movie.
Okay.
He doesn't say anything. You barely even see him, so you don't know that it's him unless you know it's him.
Right.
But the little girl on the train that sees teenage Clark running through the field, and that is, you are supposed to assume that is Lois Lane as a child. Her dad that's sitting across from her is Kirk Alyn.
Okay. Yeah, you kind of only see like the back of him. I don't remember if they gave like a real close-up shot. I know there was more shots of the mom than him from what I remember.
Yeah, you see the mom from the face, which I'll go ahead and say the mom is played by Noelle Neal, who played Kirk Alyn's and George Reeves' Lois Lane.
Okay.
But no, you don't see him. Like I said, if you don't know it's him, it's a forgettable thing. But he was the first person to play Superman back in the movie serials. And then, of course, George Reeves played him in television. And that's where I always have fun, because in this movie, he's played by Christopher Reeve. There is no S on the end of that. It's Christopher Reeve. But the one before him was George Reeves with the S.
Gotcha. Easy to make that mistake.
Yeah. So, a lot of people will say Christopher Reeves, and it's not Reeves. There's a lot of people who think, well, that's coincidence they have the same last name. They don't, because one has an S, one doesn't. Of course, we don't see Christopher Reeve for almost an hour into the movie. We get the baby, and then we get Jeff East, who plays the young Clark Kent. This is something that, talking about things you don't know unless you know, Jeff East does not speak in this movie.
Yeah, I saw that. I'm reading that today.
When Jeff East talks, it is actually Christopher Reeve's voice. His voice is entirely dubbed. Once you know that, you can hear it. and you can hear that it's Christopher Reeve's voice.
And see, I read that after I rewatched it, so I didn't pick up on it. I didn't even realize that. I think I was more enamored with the young, quote unquote, young Clark Kent, who did not look that young. I mean, it was like he almost looked older than Christopher Reeve did. But I also read that they gave him a lot of prosthetics and makeup to try to make him look more like Christopher Reeve as well. So I don't know if that really helped any. But once again, back then, making adults look like teenagers was pretty commonplace. But.
Yeah, and the prosthetics is another thing that it's one of those, once you know, it can't be unseen.
Yeah.
Because I'm watching it and I'm just looking at his nose. And it's like his nose wasn't quite the same shade as the rest of his face.
Yeah. Yeah.
And yeah. So I kind of felt bad for Jeff East. Here he is in this, big movie, and they've altered his look and dubbed his voice.
I think I read that there was actually, there was some animosity between him and Reeve for several years, and then they kind of, had a conversation and made up. But I think he was a little upset that happened. But, of course, you don't get the full story. It was just a little blurb or whatever. But I don't think Christopher Reeve even, he probably didn't even know that the younger, we say his name was Kirby.
Jeff East.
Jeff East.
Yeah.
Where I get Kirby from. I'm sure he didn't even realize that Jeff East, he probably didn't know that Jeff East didn't know that they were dubbing his voice. So he was just going in to do work for the movie. And then probably found out later that, Jeff East is talking to him. He didn't know why. And then they kind of worked it out. Of course, that's my own theory of what happened.
Yeah.
True or not. But I did see that there was animosity between them for a while because of that. So
yeah, but he can't put the blame on Reeve, because that would have been
I was a director or producer, it was somebody else's decision. I'm sure Reeve wasn't like, what would be better in this movie is if I dubbed his voice. So
yeah.
I don't think, and with him being, and this was Christopher Reeves with an S because I'm using possession. This was Christopher Reeve's first movie role, so it wasn't like he was a well-established movie star that came in with all these demands. I mean, he was pretty much unknown before this, right?
Yeah, because it was his second movie, but it was his first lead. And that's impressive enough. His second feature film, and he's got the lead.
Right.
In fact, he doesn't even get top billing. He's Superman.
Yeah. I noticed that.
Yeah, Marlon Brando and Gene Hackman's name appear before the title.
True. And Gene Hackman's in it probably, well, I don't know.
No, Brando's in it at least.
Yeah, but he has a good chunk at the beginning. I mean, it's kind of all Brando for the first, 15, 20 minutes of the movie.
Yeah.
So Hackman's a little more split up towards the end. But yeah, Hackman doesn't come in until about an hour and a half, almost the second hour.
Yeah.
No, not second hour. It's 2. Yeah, into the second hour of the movie.
Yeah. So yeah, Reeves is I think third billing, but it's not top billing. It's after the title. Right, but it kind of makes sense because this being Reeves' really first movie, and as you said, relative unknown, you had to take the bigger actors to help promote it. So Marlon Brando, Gene Hackman, letting those be the names that people go, oh yeah, I like these actors. These are the actors I'm coming from, and then they get to find out the greatness that is Christopher Reeve in this movie.
Right.
I mean, because what makes Reeve so good is that he is able to play Clark and Superman as two separate characters.
Right. Right. I mean, really to see his transformation, there's a few really good scenes. One of my favorites is actually the mugging scene with him and Lois when the mugger, wants to mug them, and he's totally the coward, totally like, whatever, I would say coward, but, he's the sheepish guy that just give him your purse, Lois, and, she's trying to beat him up. And then, of course, the mugger fires the gun. He catches the bullet without Lois seeing it. And then he fakes like he passes out. And then when she walks away and you see he looks at the bullet in his hand and kind of tosses it away. But just his countenance even changes. His face really changes, where it's like, you're really good at fooling her and thinking you're really the sheepish, mild-mannered, walk-all-over-me kind of persona, but you're not that at all. So that was like the first real glimpse of seeing that, of him flipping that switch, that I thought was really, really good.
Yeah, no, that scene is perfect for the way that he's able to combine Clark and Superman, because he plays Clark with, like you said, that almost like innocence and vulnerability.
Yeah.
But you can see that he has that confidence and that knowledge that he knows he's Superman. Because, yeah, that scene is just so great. I was talking about this with my wife when I was rewatching it, that in that scene, the fact that he actually pushes the gun out of the way for a second.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah.
I mean, it just, because again, he knows it's not that big of a deal for him. But
he, like you said, it plays that innocence of him pushing it away. It's almost, even the way he does it, even in his facial expression, is showing like, I'm scared of you, but I'm trying to diffuse the situation for Lois's sake. But once, like you said, once again, he knows that even it's almost twofold, because he knows if the guy fires the gun at him, it's going to bounce off him, and Lois is going to know he's Superman. So he's got to really diffuse the situation and not expose who he really is, but still keep up this, sheepish, mild-mannered persona. So
yeah, and we'll get into more when we're talking more about the elements of the movie, but it's that aspect of Superman seeing the good in people and trying to give people the opportunity to do the right thing. But Schuster, who created Superman, he actually based Clark off of himself and Harold Lloyd. If you're not familiar with Harold Lloyd, one of the silent film actors, comedic actors, you've probably seen a clip of him standing when a house falls and he goes straight through the window. So that's where that kind of bumbliness comes from, the physical kind of element. And that's the thing, the physicality that Reeve puts into both characters. You're talking about the scene with the mugger. The scene after the date with Superman and Lois, whatever you want to call it, the interview, when Clark comes in afterwards and he's about to go on his date, they have the moment where Lois goes to grab her coat or purse or something, and Clark takes his glasses off, and you see him stand straight, and you realize it's more than just a pair of glasses. Right. Everyone always jokes about the glasses and how are you fooled by glasses. And Reeve shows it's more than just the glasses.
Right. Yeah. So, but I agree. I mean, he does. It is physicality, and once again, I kind of picked up on that too. Like, watching it, and I'll say this: I hadn't watched Superman the movie in well over 20 years. I mean, it's been a long time since I've seen it. From beginning to end, not TV version, just sit down and really watch it. So I really kind of saw a lot of it with fresh eyes. I mean, there were great scenes that I remembered, but really seeing it with fresh eyes was really good. And like you said, that is the physicality. Like he does stand different. He does talk different. He interacts with people differently. So it is kind of that thing of like, well, if she looked really closely, she could tell, but he interacts with her completely. It's almost like a dual personality in a sense, because he's interacting with her as two totally different people. So she only sees the personality he's giving her. She doesn't have, there's no way for her to connect those two together. So, but like I said, it is more than the glasses. I agree.
Yeah. And we of course need to move on. We can talk about Christopher Reeve as much, but kind of making that full circle. I mean, Reeve is really able to, in this movie, stand on his own against, Gene Hackman.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And I know he doesn't really have scenes with Marlon Brando or Glenn Ford, but just the caliber actors that are in this movie. All right, so moving on, we were just talking about Lois Lane, so we can go ahead and talk about Lois Lane. As I just mentioned, Noelle Neal was actually the first person to play Lois. She plays young Lois, the little girl on the train's mother. You see her there very quickly. She played her in the movie serial and then actually returned to play her in the TV series, and that was after Phyllis Coates originally played her in the TV series. So Noelle Neal kind of more so is associated as Lois before Margot Kidder. And of course, she was introduced in Action Comics #1 along with Superman. In the comic, she's presented as a very aggressive, career-minded reporter. It was kind of an interesting take considering we're talking 1938, 1940 to have such a strong, independent female character in a comic book.
Yeah.
My problem, though, is that Margot Kidder's version is a little bit more on the screwball side.
Yeah, I picked up on that.
Yeah, because when we're first introduced to her, she's asking Jimmy Olsen, who you're to assume is late teens, early 20s in the movie. She's asking him how to spell a word, and she's getting corrected by Perry about she misspelled a word in one of her copies, and they don't really make her very strong as a character. She very much has to rely on the men around her in this movie.
Which is a bad trope from movies, especially in the late 70s, even in most of the 80s. So, I think we kind of talked before it started that, this is a movie adaptation that's not closely with the comics. So that's just a lot of liberties I'm sure they took. But, I mean, she had glimpses. Like I said, going back to the mugging scene, I'm not going to talk about the whole podcast because I didn't watch more of the movie than the mugging scene. But there, she clearly stood up to the mugger and she was showing some strength. But you're right. But after that, the helicopter falling, when she's driving the car and it's running out of gas, I mean, she really becomes the quote unquote damsel in distress throughout the rest of the movies. Like they showed a glimpse of it, but then they just totally abandoned it after that point. But I do, like I said at the beginning, she does rely on everybody else. Like if you're a reporter, especially for a major newspaper, I'm sure you would have passed a lot of spelling tests to get to that point.
Well, and because you mentioned the helicopter scene, and I'm not gonna talk ill of Margot Kidder. She's a good actress, but the helicopter scene, when the helicopter starts, everything starts going crazy. Her performance just was way over the top for me. With her, putting her hands in her face, and no, it was just too camp, even for this movie.
Right.
I don't know. Part of me actually would say that's probably on Margot because she's one of my least favorite parts of Amityville Horror. I think just when she deals with scenes like that, she just goes too far over the top.
Yeah, it could be her style. I'm not as big a horror fan as you, so I think I saw Amityville Horror, but I don't remember. But Margot Kidder is pretty much, the Lois Lane. That's pretty much all I really know her from or remember her from. But I can't say I picked up on the overacting maybe as much as you did. I just took it as the damsel in distress, which was pretty much on 10 during those scenes. So,
but also going into kind of her being, really kind of more incompetent. There's the scene where she's driving through the desert. Which I'm going to get to the fact that she's in the desert in a moment. She's driving through the desert with the Native American interviewing him, and she's driving.
Why didn't you?
Yeah.
Why just pull over and do the interview? Why? I didn't understand why she had to do the interview while driving with him.
Yeah.
But yeah, that scene was a little. There's a few head scratching scenes in this movie for me.
There are,
but I don't want to pick it apart because it's still overall a great movie. But it's not without its flaws and its plot holes.
Agreed. So. And probably the person behind most of the plot holes is our villain, Lex Luthor. Lex Luthor was not an original villain for Superman. He actually didn't appear until Action Comics number 23, so 2 years later in 1940. And when he's first introduced, he's just a mad scientist. The name Lex didn't come until later. He's originally just called Luthor. He had a full head of red hair, which people who know the comics know that was originally retconned as Lex's original hair. The baldness that Lex has was actually, story goes, it was an error on the part of one of the artists. He actually thought it was another character, and so he didn't draw the hair on. And by the 1960s, they just went with it, and they made him losing his hair part of Lex's origin story.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
That's good.
And then they updated him with the times. Of course, back in the 40s, we were still, as I mentioned earlier, about comic books and in the sci-fi era, so a mad scientist more made sense. As we went into the 60s and the 70s, it made a little bit more sense to make Lex Luthor a corrupt kind of businessman, again, fitting with the times. I don't know, though, where the idea came for him to have this real estate scheme that he has in this movie. The scheme seems extremely far-fetched, and again, it's going with that campiness, kind of the Batman camp of he's doing something that you're just going, there's no way that just a couple of bombs is going to take part of California off the United States.
Yeah, it's interesting because you kind of see the movie in three different segments, and they're all really kind of different because you have the opening segment, which is very sci-fi, on Krypton, a lot of the space, and it's like I got a lot of like Star Trek, the motion picture, and of course some Star Wars vibes from that because it's very much sci-fi. Then you got the young Clark Kent years is kind of more like the Norman Rockwell, just more of a different feel, a different look. And then once you got to like the older Clark, it did get more kind of goofy and campy at that point, which was kind of weird because it didn't follow everything up to that point was very serious. It was very clearly defined, but I think it lost some of, once again, I'm trying not to pick apart the movie because I like it, but we're going to talk about it. So, but it did lose. So it got off balanced, in the back half. Like you said, I think it does have those campy moments. But once again, when you think about it, being the very first real superhero movie, they're already in uncharted territory. So they're probably like kind of throwing everything in there, trying to appeal to all these different kinds of audiences because they were trying to make all the money they were spending. They're trying to reach everybody. So that's my thought. Anyway.
It's a very good. I agree with a lot of that. I mean, there were uncharted territory. I mean, really, all you had before this was the very campy Adam West Batman.
Right.
And so, here we are. We're doing a movie, but we don't want to go that campy. You want it to be a little bit more reasonable, but you are dealing with, a man who can fly and shoot, lasers out of his eyes. So in this movie, Lex Luthor is played by Gene Hackman. He's not the first person to play Lex Luthor. Back in the movie serials, there was Lyle Talbot in the kind of movie-ish Atom Man versus Superman. Lex is actually the Atom Man in that movie. Spoilers. But, funny little trivia here, Lyle Talbot, who played the original Lex Luthor on screen, actually also played Jim Gordon in the Batman movie serials.
Oh, okay.
So a little trivia fact for you there. I don't want to get into Perry White, Jimmy Olsen. They're very small characters in this. Yeah. They don't really serve any purpose other than just being there. The only other two characters that serve a purpose were actually created for this movie, and that's Otis and Miss Tessmacher. Otis, of course, played by Ned Beatty. Miss Tessmacher, Eve Tessmacher, played by Valerie Perrine, I think is how you pronounce her name. Neither were from the comics. However, Miss Tessmacher became such a fan favorite that she was later added into the comic books.
Yeah, I know. We'll get into this in further episodes, but I've been watching Supergirl on, of course, the last couple of seasons with Lex being more prominent in that. Miss Tessmacher, I got a good chuckle every time that Gene Hackman, Miss Tessmacher, and was yelling her name, and it was very reminiscent to how the current John Cryer playing Lex Luthor kind of did the same thing. So I thought that was pretty funny.
Yeah.
But
So currently the series Supergirl has really only the second ever live action Eve Tessmacher, although the show Smallville introduced a character that was a hodgepodge of a couple of Lex. Lex in the comics has a female bodyguard named Mercy, and what they did in Smallville was they created Lex's sister, and her name was Tess. So there was the Tessmacher, and then she was Tess Mercer, and so they kind of played off of the Tessmacher and the Mercy together there.
Yeah, I did watch Smallville. I didn't watch the entire series, but I was a pretty regular viewer of that. The first probably three or four seasons. How many seasons did I go?
10.
That was a pretty long running show. So I think I made it on. I might have made it to the 5th season, but I was a big fan of that show too. So.
Yeah, and of course that's one I'm definitely going to hit from time to time on this show. For people who don't know me personally, I am a huge Superman fan, and so I will hit just about everything Superman related on this podcast.
Yeah. He would have just made the only podcast if he really wanted to.
Yeah. So we can't move on, though, without talking about Jor-El, played by the great Marlon Brando. Jor-El was introduced in Action Comics #1, although he's not named. You more just get the story of Superman being sent by a rocket by his parents, and so there is a panel that features his parents, so Jor-El's there. He wasn't actually named until later in 1939, and it was actually not in the comics. It was in the Superman comic strip that came out in the newspaper. in the movie serials, he was played by Nelson Lee, so the different character here. But of course, here we have the Godfather himself, Marlon Brando, which fun little trivia. And I actually did not know this until recently, that this movie, the script was originally written by Mario Puzo, the same guy who wrote The Godfather.
They didn't use from what I understand, they didn't use a line from his original script that was completely rewritten, but he had to get top billing of the writers in the credits. But yeah, it was like a 500-page script for Superman 1 and 2 because they were filming them both together. Mm-hmm. But they said one movie would barely be 200 pages. So 500 pages was way more than they could use for two movies. Said it was excellently written, but It was not workable. Yeah, I think somebody said that if they would have used his script as a shooting script, it would have taken them 5 years to make it. That was how broad and how, spectacular the script was. So not that it wasn't a great script, it was just probably too ambitious for what they were willing to do at that time. So,
well, again, we're talking about the guy who wrote The Godfather.
Yeah.
And we're also, of course, we don't know anything about the original script that he wrote, but you're looking at, again, he had to pull from 35 years of comics to pull it together to make a movie that satisfied comic book lovers of the character. All right, so let's get into the actual moving panels, the stuff in this movie that had its connections to the comic. Again, it's not really in the story, it's more in just the stuff that we saw. And this one's perfect because the movie literally opens with a comic book.
Yeah, very, very smart way to open this movie, as we would call it today, good fan service for those that knew Superman from the comics. I thought it was well done. And that was one part of the movie that I didn't remember at all rewatching it. I mean, I was like, is this how this movie starts? I don't remember this. Yeah. I was completely enamored by it. I mean, I was totally drawn in, like, oh, this is going to be cool. So I think it worked.
Yeah, I think people, because the opening credit scene is so iconic.
Oh, yeah.
That I think more people remember that.
Yeah.
And they remember the S and the kind of the 3D nature of it flying onto the screen. And, of course, John Williams' score.
Oh, I mean, it just makes me happy. Even hearing it just makes me. Yeah. That's so iconic. I mean, it's almost more iconic than Superman himself. That theme is so emblazoned in our memories to really pair up with. I mean, you have a great theme. You can hear it and know exactly what it's from. And it definitely up there and probably the top 5, if not the top 3 most recognizable movie, character themes. So.
And I would almost bet you that if you were to name your 5, at least 3 of them were written by John Williams.
Yeah. Yeah, you're probably right.
Which actually caused a little bit of drama when this came out because John Williams had scored Star Wars right before this. And a lot of people thought that they were too similar, that he had gotten lazy and he just kind of rewrote the Star Wars music to be the Superman music.
Yeah. Now I want to go back and listen to them. I want to listen to both of them back to back and kind of hear it, but I off my memory, I can't really hear it.
Well,
so.
I mean, of course, I'm a huge Superman fan, so I know the Superman theme, but I will even admit, when I was a kid, the Superman theme, the Star Wars theme, and the Indiana Jones theme, all written by John Williams, there would be times that I would start, humming one.
And go right into the other one?
Yeah. Or forget, or go, wait a minute. No, that's not Superman. That's, Star Wars, or that's Indiana Jones, and mixing them up. So I'm not going to deny they do have similar sounds to them.
Yeah. Yeah, but okay. I'm not as... I'll take that one.
All right, so, of course, like I said, there's not really a lot of story that comes from the comics, so it's really just things, and I guess the one we'll focus on first is Superman himself. Now, I know we've talked about the character, but I want to talk more about Superman as an idea. When Lois is interviewing him, she pretty much, says, what's your purpose and all that, and he says, truth, justice, and the American way. And that, of course, being the mission statement of Superman. And it's the fact that Superman throughout the comics has really represented something more than just a character. So he's more than just a character or corporate property of DC. He really represents the ideal of humanity, in my opinion.
Right. Yeah. I would agree with that statement. Yeah.
And I think Reeve understood that too. I think he plays it very well. I mentioned this earlier. The look that he gives, the way that he performs in the scenes, especially with the criminals, you can tell that he is trying to understand why someone would do something bad.
Mm-hmm.
He always wants to give them the opportunity to do something good. You know, I even like the cat burglar that he catches on the side of the building. Great visual effect.
That's a great scene. Yeah, I mean, think about, you're kind of saying it there, but just think about the juxtaposition, even of his upbringing. So growing up in Kansas, kind of middle America, where it is simpler. Yeah, he did deal with bullies as a teenager, but then you put him in kind of the New York City like metropolis, and that's, hustle and bustle. He's really in a different world.
Mm-hmm.
So to kind of, it's a way of saying that aw shucks, innocent country boy kind of attitude in the city world, he is going to stand out. He is going to be more of that American Pie, good old American kind of character, even in Metropolis. So I don't know. That's my kind of thought about it.
Yeah, and he almost, when he confronts even Lex, the look on his face, it's not anger. It's almost like he's confused and sad, not because of the actions of Luthor, but because Luthor enjoys it.
Right. Yeah, he definitely wants to understand. Well, and then once again, you're twofold. Now he's also from another planet.
Mm-hmm.
So his whole life he's been kind of trying to figure out why humans do what they do. Of course, we don't know that much about Krypton, but even the early scenes, the beginning with Jor-El and him pleading with the council about, I believe the planet's gonna die, gonna be destroyed in the next couple of days, and seeing something that his counterparts couldn't see. So whether it's intentional or not, but I kind of seen the implication that he's much like his father of, I want to understand why I want to protect everyone, even if you don't understand why I want you to. So yeah. I don't know if that made sense or not.
No, it definitely did. I agree. There is that parallel there of Jor-El. Again, Jor-El doesn't get angry, really.
Right. He's very even-tempered, very, very even keel.
Yeah. And he just has to accept when the council goes against him. And then I love when they say, well, will you follow the will of the council? And he says, I will not be silent, but he says, neither me nor my wife will leave the planet. And I'm going, notice he didn't say anything about his son.
Right. Exactly. But going back to the scene with Superman and Lex, it is a very interesting scene and not what we would typically see from a protagonist, antagonist kind of a showdown. I mean, they're, like you said, I think he's trying to understand why Lex would do something so diabolical and trying to understand what would make you want to do so. Why would there's so much good that you could be and so much good in the world that why would you want to do something so bad? So it's a great characteristic of the character.
Yeah, because even in that first meeting between them, they definitely play on the battle of wits that Lex is discovering that Superman is highly intelligent as well.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, the whole anger thing is my favorite aspect of the character, especially for this movie. He doesn't get angry until he can't save Lois.
Yeah. And that was such a big moment because it was so out of character for him that it even made that scene even more intense to see him like scream and just kind of take off in the sky.
Yeah, and part of me thinks too, that famous shot of him flying off and then just that guttural scream that he lets out. It really, from a storyline aspect, I almost think, okay, this is Clark or Superman, whatever you want to say, finally going, I don't understand. Which started from the very beginning when he's talking to Jonathan after he's bullied and left by the kids, and he shows off by running home and getting there before the kids pass by. And he's talking to Jonathan and he was like, I wanted to do something about it, but I knew I shouldn't.
Mm-hmm.
And now that he's become Superman, he's, we go through the almost like montage of him stopping a bunch of criminals. Then he meets Lex, and he's confronted with Lex and Lex's morality. And then when he can't save Lois, it almost goes all the way back at the beginning when Jonathan dies, and Clark tells his mom, Martha, I have all these powers, and I couldn't save him.
Mm-hmm.
And now it's
Mm-hmm.
happened again,
Right.
And yeah.
Yeah. But in that instance, which I thought was really cool, is while he's going to do something about it, he's hearing those words from Jor-El, his father, telling him, you can't do. And it's almost like, if it means I can save someone I love, that stuff doesn't matter anymore. And it's almost like, this one's for me. I've selflessly given all this time, but this one's for me. So it's interesting.
Yeah. And that's another thing. After he's sent off in the ship as a baby, he spends 3 years traveling to Earth.
Right.
And we, of course, see where the baby is in the ship, and you're hearing Jor-El's voice. And I like that because it gives us that nod that even in these 3 years, these early 3 years, which, a lot of people will say are important to a child's development and all that, he is being parented.
Mm-hmm.
It's just he's being parented by a recording, but he's receiving knowledge. He's learning between right and wrong even before he meets the Kents, who a lot of people do attribute to his ability to know right and wrong and be the Boy Scout that he is.
Right.
I do want to talk real quick about the S. People always talk about the S and how it's kind of silly that he goes around with an S on his chest. The S was just an S in the comic books. It had always just been an S. They later, when they made the Superboy story, just explained that he comes up with it. The movie, though, is the first time we start to see that it has Kryptonian significance.
Yes.
And Brando, I heard it kind of pushed for him to have the S, and that it would represent it was like the family crest, that it would represent the House of El. Which
that's how I interpreted it from the movie, definitely.
Yeah, and of course that's what it became in the comics. I know more recently in Man of Steel they said that it was the Kryptonian symbol for hope, but it still was the family crest. And then it just becomes coincidence that it's an S and he calls himself Superman.
Well, even in this one, he doesn't name himself Superman. That's the name that Lois pretty much gives, and he just kind of adapts into. So
yeah. So yeah, because he already has the S, and he doesn't make any reference to it. So again, making that connection that it's a Kryptonian symbol. And speaking of Krypton, or I can't help but point this out, as Marlon Brando said, Krypton.
Yeah. Krypton.
I don't know why he always said Krypton, but it bothered me every time.
Right. Doesn't he say, or so is his name Jor-El or Yarel? Because I think he says Yarel at one point too, where the J is with the Y kind of sound.
Oh, I don't even think I've ever caught that. Yeah. I think, again, I just, I know what it's supposed to be, and that's what I'm going to accept.
Yeah, it caught me because I think he said, this is I'm your father, Yarel, and I was like, I thought it was Jor-El, but anyway, proceed.
Well, in the comics, Krypton, of course, is mentioned in Action Comics 1 because it does have the origin. It's just a highly advanced planet. The whole crystal aspect that this movie ties in didn't exist. Now, in the comic strip, again, from the newspaper, they started delving deeper into the people of Krypton. And they actually made it so that Kryptonians had the power. Even while they were on Krypton, they had the ability to leap, they had the strength, they had all of that. But as Superman's story evolved, and you start seeing how pretty much invulnerable Superman was, the question then started to arise, well, wait, then why couldn't the Kryptonians have survived the destruction of the planet? If Superman can can survive a nuclear explosion and breathe in space, as they've also shown in the comics, then why couldn't the Kryptonians have survived the explosion of Krypton? So in the 50s, they started updating the story, and that was where the whole Earth's atmosphere, the gravity, the red sun versus the yellow sun, and all of that. And I do like that they throw that in this movie, and Jor-El's and Lara, his parents, are explaining when he's on Earth. All right, and then of course, Krypton produces kryptonite, which appears in this movie. In the comics, it first appeared in Superman number 61 back in 1949. It was actually, however, first mentioned in the Superman radio show in 1943. Rumor is that it was created as an excuse for, his name has slipped my mind. I think it's Bud Collyer, who was the voice of Superman. It was an excuse because he needed to go on vacation, but they still had shows to do. So they introduced the kryptonite, this meteor rock that weakened Superman, so that they could do episodes and they could get a different actor just to groan and sound like Superman was sick.
Right, those clever radio writers.
Oh yeah. Now, when it was introduced in the comics, it was not green originally; it was red. Now they've later, once they introduced kryptonite, they introduced it in a variety of colors, and every color has a different effect on Superman. This was another thing. Again, we're talking about kind of some of the weak points of this movie. The scene where Lex figures out about kryptonite is just ridiculous.
Yeah, he does kind of pull that out of thin air, doesn't he?
Most definitely. I mean, he's talking about, okay, well, if the planet was destroyed, so many years ago and takes 3 years to get away, and he's talking, and I'm going, okay, so he's figuring out, about Krypton, but then he just says if fragments of his planet came into our atmosphere, they're going to become radioactive, which means they will be able to harm or potentially kill him. And I'm going, how do you get to that?
Right. Yeah, there's several scenes in this movie that I had that same, like, how did we there's something I'm missing in how we jump from this point to that point, but try not to think too hard about it.
No, again, as people always say, you've got to have a little bit of leeway to understand that they're taking like we talked about, a 35 almost 40-year-old story, and they're condensing it down to, 2.5 hour movie, but still, you got to be able to hit things very quickly, and you got to get kryptonite in there somehow, and this was what they came up with.
Sometimes you just gotta put in there to move the story forward, and once again, back then, people were going to the theater. They'd see it one time, maybe twice if it's that good. On TV, several years later, it wasn't multiple watches like we watch stuff now where we can watch it and dissect it and pick those things apart. It's, they're looking at the overall arching story, not thinking about the details of how it all connects together. So
yeah, agreed.
I'll give him a pass on that one. But it still made me think of, there were still a few scenes where I was like, how did we get there all of a sudden? So
then there's the iconic Fortress of Solitude. The look of this fortress is specific to this movie. It still to this day does not look that way in the comics. His Fortress of Solitude in the comics is just something that he created inside of a mountain.
Okay.
The fortress first appeared in Action Comics number 241 in June of 1958. Again, it's just in the side of a mountain. There's no connection to Krypton other than there's the famous statue that Superman builds inside of it of his parents, Lara and Jor-El, but it's not created by Kryptonian crystals. It's not the crystal format. But that's what they always use kind of on TV and movies. That's what they used. I even remember the Super Friends cartoon. And that's what his fortress looked like. And then Smallville, of course, which was clearly adapted from these movies, decided to go with the same look. Just a quick little side note about the comic book fortress. And I get why they wouldn't have done this in a movie. The comic book fortress has a giant door, and the door can only be opened by this giant key that is so heavy. Superman is, of course, the only person who can lift it.
Okay.
But to think about them putting that into a movie, showing Christopher Reeve, picking up this giant key,
right,
and opening a lock on a giant door, I get that. That's going to be very campy, very cheesy.
Right.
So let's talk about some scenes in the movie. Of course, the most iconic that has just become a staple with this movie franchise is the death of Jonathan Kent.
Yes.
Now, that's not in the comics. Jonathan Kent was still alive even when Superman died back in the 90s.
Okay.
So Jonathan did get to see Clark become Superman, and he's always been there. The only live-action Superman story that has not killed off Jonathan was the Lois and Clark series on ABC in the 90s with Dean Cain. They kept Jonathan alive. But this movie, Smallville, even though they had Jonathan for a longer aspect, eventually had him die of the heart attack. Man of Steel had him not die of a heart attack. He was killed by a tornado.
Yeah, interesting take. I remember that.
But Glenn Ford, his performance just made Jonathan so much more important to Superman's origin.
Yeah, and it's very brief too. He's not. He doesn't have a whole lot, but it's still significant. And that's a tough scene to watch.
Yeah, just that final moment where he's talking to Clark and he says, you're here for a reason.
Yeah.
And he can't put words into what that reason is, but you can tell that he knows that Clark's meant for something more, and he looks so proud to be Clark's dad, and then all of a sudden, he stops and he's grabbing his forearm, and then just that change in his expression, and then he says, "Oh no." And again, you just mentioned he's in there for so long, but it's such an impactful moment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then even how, Clark is off somewhere else. Mom Kent comes out and see, it's like, it's just a great, a very well constructed scene to kind of really, not really build, but have that full punch of the emotion. The like I said, the speech that's made, or the conversation him and Clark have right before that moment. And then he's kind of by himself when it happens, and you see him drop, and then they all kind of rush to him after that. It's just, it's a good scene, but it's a tough scene.
Oh yeah. So. Even as many times as I've seen the movie, that moment probably still always brings a tear to my eye.
Oh yeah.
All right, so let's go to the other extreme, and let's talk about the scene that is also extremely infamous with this movie, and that is when Superman reverses time.
Yes, this is one scene in the movie that I definitely remembered from a kid, because I was like, can you really do that?
So I'm not a scientist or anything. I'm just going to go ahead and say no. My assumption would be is that if you all of a sudden change the direction of the Earth, that it would just cause chaos.
Yeah, if we turn the Earth the other way, it reverses time. It's almost as insane as Ferris Bueller telling Cameron that if you run the car in reverse, it will make the odometer go backwards. So
yeah. No, same idea though. However, I will defend the writers. He actually did it in the comic books.
Okay, all right.
So back in the Silver Age of the comics in the 1960s, Clark or Superman actually did travel back in time. Now, they didn't do the whole spinning the Earth backwards aspect, but they did where Superman believed if he flew fast enough, he could break the time barrier.
Okay.
And so he does it. He actually goes back. In one storyline, he goes back to Krypton before it's destroyed and sees his parents. There's a time where he went back to the early days of Earth with cavemen and dinosaurs. But the difference is that in the comics, whenever he's time traveled, he's more of just an observer. Like, he's not able to actually change anything.
Okay.
So when he goes back to Krypton, Krypton's still going to be destroyed. He just went back.
He just to see and observe.
Yeah. So again, I'll give them some leeway that, it has happened, but that is probably my biggest kind of like, oh, come on. That's not really a power Superman has. Though you mentioned Superman 2 earlier, it's still not as bad as him pulling an S off his chest and throwing it that he'll do in the next movie.
Yeah, I'll be watching that one later this week. I'm just going to go ahead and watch all of them again now that I started with the first one. So,
second was good.
I remember. I said I think I have more memories of the second one than I do the first one. So I have not seen the Donner cut or the. Didn't they release a Donner cut of the second one?
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, so we've teased about this. Let's go ahead and hit this. What things in this movie that we haven't talked about already that you just went, okay, that doesn't make sense?
Oh man, Okay, so first one, probably not the first one, but one I've wanted to bring up before. So when Clark is leaving and his mother says, "Where are you going?" Because I think I'm going to go north, and then it shows all of a sudden he's somewhere in the Arctic and he's just walking. And I was thinking, but you can fly, man. So why don't you just fly to wherever you're going?
Well,
and so maybe that's just that's just my brain thinking about it.
Well,
but where did he go?
That one, I think you can make a defense for. I think that one you could argue he may not have known he could fly yet. That was actually not shown.
Yeah, we hadn't seen him fly up to that point, so I will concede to that one.
Because we don't know what all he learns from Jor-El, because clearly there's the time between him creating the fortress and then becoming Superman that we don't see.
Yeah, so that's just one that stood out to me when I was watching it. Other things that did make so I didn't understand, and once again, maybe I could have clearly missed something. I'll admit it. I'm not always the sharpest tool in the shed, so some things just I don't grasp. But I didn't understand why he was instantly obsessed with Lois Lane. Like, was there any kind of history before then? It's just like, hey, here's Clark. He's new, and he's like on her like rice from the beginning. And it's like I didn't really see like a glance or something to kind of like, oh, she's all of a sudden taking over my attention. It's just like instantly he just has to be with her and wants to be. So it was a little scary at points. But
oh no, yeah, he very much is kind of almost stalkerish at the beginning there, and even the fact that we're all aware he's playing with her as being both Clark and Superman. So
right.
No, that definitely. I will say one of the things that points out to me, and it does bother me as a Superman fan. I like that the first time he has to turn into Superman, we get the kind of little joke of him going up to the phone booth, and it's one of the half phone booths where he can't close himself into it, and then he uses the revolving door. And then there's the scene later that just makes it even worse, where he jumps out the window of the Daily Planet. Mm-hmm. And in both cases, they make his transformation magical.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And I'm like, wait, where did his clothes go? Like, you clearly show the famous, opening up the shirt and showing the S, so he's got the costume underneath. Right. And when he's spinning around the revolving door, you can assume he's changing. But then when they show him fall out of the building, they literally do a dissolve and show his clothes disappear and the suit appear. And I just go, I don't like this.
Yeah, I didn't pick up on that one as distinctly as you did, but it is a good head scratcher for sure.
And then, of course, my other big thing is, where exactly is Metropolis?
No, yeah,
because they show the city; it's clearly a New York skyline. Mm-hmm. When he has the flying scene with Lois, they even fly by the Statue of Liberty.
Right, which is why I keep wanting to call it New York. I don't want to call it Metropolis, because even as a kid, had never been to New York. It just because even the cop cars like the same.
Oh yeah, the cops are
City.
The cops are dressed like they're New York cops. But then you get to the second half of the movie and you're like, okay, well now Lois is in California.
Yeah, and she obviously got there very quickly because he came into work asking, "Where's Lois?" And he's like, "Oh, she's on the West Coast." She would have had to have left, several hours, even if it flew. I don't think she was driving that car that ran out of gas to get from Metropolis to.
Yeah, because that's my thing. So Metropolis is in New York, but with very easy access to California.
Well, even at the end when the missiles are launched, and he's chasing the missile that's going to New Jersey, is clearly in the desert. Mm-hmm. And so I was kind of like, where were they launched from? Were they launched from the West Coast? Because if that's the case, there's no way he was going to get to Lois in time, because the rocket had to go a shorter distance to go from the desert to Nevada, because she was at the Hoover Dam, which is in Nevada.
Well, they never say it's the Hoover Dam. They just say it's a dam.
Yeah, gotcha.
Yeah.
So when he's going to get the rocket that's headed to New Jersey, which clearly didn't make it there, but it was just when he was chasing the rocket, I was like, wait a minute, is he going for the one that's going towards Lois, or is he going for New Jersey, where Tessenbacher's, was it her mom or her aunt? Yeah, her mom lived. So.
And see, that's another thing. I would have liked at least maybe a scene before Superman shows up where Tessmacher is talking to her mom or something, just to go ahead and establish that she's got that strong connection. Because, that's another thing. The Tessmacher turn to rescue Superman.
Yes.
You know,
a little too easy.
Yeah.
A little too easy.
Yeah, I mean, that one's one that, again, you could have just had a quick little scene of her talking to her mom, and then Lex, yells at her to come, and so she has to hang up, just to establish that, she cares a lot about her and all that. Speaking of Lex...
And once again, okay, sorry, so we're getting real nitpicky. Talking about that, we're in the pool, the water scene where he's got the kryptonite around his neck. I was like, dude, just let it fall off your neck. Just put your head down and let it slide. I was like, he kept trying to lift it with his arms. I'm like, you don't have strength. It's like, use your brain, dude. I kind of chuckled a little bit at that scene. Once again, I'm not trying to nitpick too much, and it's hard to see on a podcast as I'm trying to, show you what he should be doing. It's a little hard to describe, but basically, you're in the water, so do like you're going to dive underwater. And let gravity pull the necklace off of your head, and then you're free.
Because it's clearly on this very heavy chain, and so...
Yeah, he didn't wrap it around him like multiple times
just
to
a
make
necklace.
It tight. Anyway, I digress.
No, you're fine. Again, we're going to nitpick a few things here, but that's what's fun about it.
Exactly.
Just because my last little one was Lex's hair. Or his wigs.
Yes.
So they clearly establish early on that he wears wigs, because you see Otis actually find a wig. I think it's in his bed, Lex's bed, and he goes and puts it on the mannequin head, and you see a couple other wigs. And so if you know that Lex is bald, it goes ahead and establish, okay, he's wearing a wig. But then you have the scene where Lex is swimming in that pool.
Yes.
And he's wearing a swim cap, which I accept. He's wearing a swim cap, but I would then assume he wouldn't need to be wearing a wig while he's swimming. But you do see his sideburns coming out of the side of the shower cap. All right, so, and then, we've got all these other aspects of Lex, in a disguise when he's the trucker, and and he's wearing hats.
He did wear the red hair wig as the ambulance driver. Yeah. So going back to the red hair, original hair in the comics. So
but again, my thing was mainly that pool scene. Like, if he's wearing, you don't swim with a wig on. But again, that's nitpicking. So is there any other aspects, any scenes, anything you want to discuss about the movie?
No, I think we've covered a lot of it. Once again, I was a little surprised when I put it in to realize, started that it was over 2 hours. Thinking about movies, especially superhero movies back, in the 70s, 80s, I was looking more of like an hour 40, hour and 30 minute. But in watching it, especially like I said, the first half, I was thinking, this is a very, very good origin story superhero movie.
Yeah.
Because he doesn't rush through his young years. I mean, it's not like, it's different than like Spider-Man or even Batman, where you get glimpses of him as a child, but it's most of the movie is him as an adult. So for him to take the time, especially the Krypton scenes and Jor-El, and then I would have liked a little bit more time in Smallville, which I think was why Smallville, the show, was so popular, because it gave you some of that unknown history, I guess, if you only watch the movies. But I think the runtime wasn't bad. I mean, it felt slow in a few spots, but it didn't drag as much as I thought it would, being over 2 hour movie. Like I said, the opening credits run for about 10 minutes, so that took some time off.
Yeah. Well, and then also, we don't see Superman until almost 50 minutes into the movie.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's just for the little fly towards the camera scene. And then we go to Metropolis, and we're with Clark for another 15 minutes, and we don't see him do the helicopter rescue, which is when we first get our true glimpse of Superman, until a little over an hour into the movie. And I think that's something people forget about, too, is that we don't see Superman for almost the first full hour of the movie.
But once again, there was no template for them to follow when this was made. Once again, going back, this was the first real superhero origin story film, motion picture. So it's Superman the movie, quote unquote.
Yeah.
But so they, good, bad, or indifferent, it's original in its intent. They didn't know to say, hey, let's skip all this early stuff and go right to the action, or no, let's give I think they balanced it pretty well for it to be 2 hours and 10, 15 minutes,
I think
something
it's
like that.
220-ish.
I think it's 223. So give pretty much a full first hour, really just showing how he became, how he got to Earth, and then Clark kind of growing up and learning about his abilities, and then let the second half be what they would consider more of the standard superhero, what we call now a standard superhero movie. So I think it holds up well.
Well, I think we've nitpicked enough. We've talked about the scenes that we've liked, didn't like, confused by. So I think it's time we can make a final decision here. So on moving panels, we base the movie off of kind of the way we would treat a comic book. Do we bag it, stack it, or trade it? Bag it meaning that it's a keeper, that it's something you're going to put into the bag with the board, you're going to tape it closed, you're going to cherish the fact that it is part of your collection. You're going to put it into the long box and put it on a shelf. Stack it means you enjoyed it, but you're just going to throw it into a stack of comic books, maybe look at it from time to time. You might put it, in the little magazine pile you have in your living room or next to the toilet even. You like it, but it's not one you're going to really cherish. And then, of course, trade it means you'd rather just get rid of it, trade it for something better and whatnot. So, Tim, I'll let you go ahead and decide. Do you bag it, stack it, or trade it, and why?
I think this is a tough one, because I think purely because it's a first in so many areas, being the first Superman full-length feature film, being the very first superhero movie, I would have to bag it for that reason. Even though probably quality-wise, rewatchability, it would probably fall more in the stack it, but I wouldn't want it to get damaged, stacked with all the magazines. So, and then too, I think because we mentioned earlier about Superman 1 and 2 being filmed together and kind of, we're going to see the continuation of the story. It doesn't really stand on its own. So I want to see the second one again to kind of put the whole story together. But my long way to get to that answer is I would bag it.
Yeah, I may be biased to this because I am such a Superman fan, but I definitely would bag it.
I said no surprise.
So
there.
I would, Superman story aside, I would back it just for Christopher Reeve's performance. Again, this really established him as a leading man. Of course, the association between Christopher Reeve and Superman would go with him through the rest of his life. But again, this movie reinvented Superman. It gave us a new kind of take on Superman. In the comic books at this time, they had kind of drifted away. I mean, Clark was actually a news anchor for Galaxy Communications. He wasn't a news reporter for the Daily Planet. Superman was actually the strongest he had ever been. And visually even represented that. He was starting to get more muscular in the comics. And I like that Reeve being fit, but not necessarily a mountain of a man. I mean, he was 6'4". He was a tall guy, but him not being extremely muscular, I like. And I gotta say, this is a movie that no matter how many times I've watched it, no matter how old I get, the awe, the wonder that I felt as a kid, I still feel watching this movie. I honestly still believe a man can fly when I watch this. Those practical effects, even though it's wire work, is so good.
Right. Once again, being the first, they had to go from the old TV with the old, the really, really old special effects. But some of those flying scenes to me still hold up really well. It's not. It could be the HD transfer now or whatever, but I thought it's still well done. Yeah. Very well done.
Yeah, no, the way they shoot it and the way Reeve is able to position his body, even with the wire work, you really do. It's something that CGI cannot accomplish. It's just so great. So
Right.
definitely bag it. I cherish this movie. I would watch it on repeat if I could. With Superman 2, as you're saying, you got to have that. And I love that this movie sets up Superman 2 at the very beginning.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, Tim. Well, thank you for joining us. Why don't you tell everybody where they can hear more of you and how they can know a little bit more about your podcast?
All right, cool. Thanks. Once again, thanks a lot for having me on the podcast. Really appreciate it, Laramy. So, yes, I have a podcast called the 80s Flick Flashback Podcast. If you love 80s movies like I love 80s movies, then you'll love our podcast. And as Laramy has mentioned, he has been a co-host on several episodes. There at the beginning, he was kind of our Stephen King aficionado with Stand By Me and The Shining. We also had him on some other episodes as well. So, but you can find us on all the podcast platforms, not all of them, most of them, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Anchor, Google Podcasts. But I also have a Facebook group called Movie Views, News and Reviews, which is kind of like the parent company. It's not even a company, but you know what I'm saying, of the 80s Flick Flashback Podcast. But there it's a group that you can find on Facebook. And we talk about old movies and current movies and sharing news and trailers, which right now is kind of a tough thing to do because there's not now our news is like what's going on video on demand and what's we may see in a theater in the next 2 years. But that's what we got there. So you can find us on Facebook, Instagram, Movie Views as well, and podcast. That's it.
All right. Thank you, Tim. And thank you, everyone, for listening to this episode as we walked through Superman the movie. For Moving Panels, I'm Laramy Wells, and I'll see you on the other side of the page.